Have you ever wondered what would have happened if that letter that was never sent had reached its destination? What if, by a miracle of time and love, someone gathered every torn piece of what was kept quiet and brought to light a forgotten truth? And that letter, the letter she wrote with her heart in pieces, which was destroyed by fear and rebuilt by the courage of the daughter who was born from silence. If this story touches your heart, subscribe now to the Say You Pudes Failure channel, like it, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and stay until the end. Because some truths only blossom when love insists on living, even after everything. I was written with tears and tremors, not with ink, not in haste, not in anger, but with the urgency of a heart that could no longer bear to hide the truth. I am the letter she never sent, the confession that was born in the shadows and was torn before touching destiny. I am the last attempt at courage of a woman who loved so much that she was afraid to love alone, afraid of not being heard, afraid of losing even more than she had already lost. Her name was Elisa, and no, she wasn't strong all the time. She was one of those women who speak softly but feel loudly, who hold the world on their shoulders but cry in secret in the shower, who smile wholeheartedly while their eyes reveal old tiredness. And he, Henrique, was the kind of man who arrives slowly without promising anything, but suddenly becomes everything. They met on a normal afternoon, one of those with overcast skies and timid winds. She was trying to draw at a cafe table while waiting for a friend who never showed up. He was reading a book with a crumpled cover, his eyes immersed in worlds that weren't there. It was the waiter who brought them together by accident, switched their orders, a silly confusion, a shared laugh, and when they realized it, they were already asking each other's names with the delicacy of someone who knows that something bigger was beginning. The love between them was not fire, it was embers, the kind that burn inside without fanfare but warm everything around it. He wrote notes that he left hidden in her bag. She drew on napkins and stuck them on the door of his refrigerator. They shared silences, songs that no one else listened to, old movies, whispered promises after wine. Henrique said that time was a detail when you found the right one, and Elisa believed in this with the faith of someone who is daydreaming. But life, which doesn't ask if we're ready, turned the page too soon. Henrique received an offer to work in another state, a chance too big to refuse, and she, with a fragile smile and eyes red from a bad night's sleep, said he should go. She didn't want to be the burden, she didn't want to beg for something she couldn't handle. She said she would wait for him, and maybe she would have waited, if it weren't for the positive test 2 months later. Elisa cried for hours when she saw the result. She wasn't afraid of her son, she was afraid of not having the courage to tell him, afraid of being forgotten, afraid that he no longer wanted to know about her. It was then that she sat on the living room floor in the middle of the night, with trembling hands and a racing heart, and wrote. Each word came out as if it had been ripped from her chest. She told how she found out, how she was afraid of interrupting his dream, how she loved him even more since she found out that he would stop being just a man and would become a father. She didn't beg, she just wanted him to know, to have the right to know, that even if he didn't come back, he would take that truth with him, in his heart, in his memory, in any place he called home. And when she was done, she folded me carefully, put perfume on the paper, ran her fingers over each line as if trying to erase the pain, but then came the silence, the fear, the regret. She read it out loud, and at the end she was silent for so long that I thought she was going to fall asleep on me. But no, with a heavy sigh and teary eyes, she tore me into 7 pieces, one for each month of silence that would come after, one for each night she would spend looking at her growing belly and wondering if she did the right thing. He hid me in the back of a drawer, behind old papers, behind dead memories, and never spoke about me again. I stayed there for years, torn apart, but not forgotten, because love, when it is true, does not disappear, it transforms into memory, into longing, into questions that we pretend not to hear, and even without having been sent, even without a stamp, without an envelope, without a destination, I never ceased to exist. I knew that one day someone would open that drawer, someone with eyes like hers, with curiosity in their blood, and courage in their heart, and that day was closer than she imagined. She stood at the airport door as if she were holding her own heart in her hands, and she didn't know whether to wave, smile, cry, or simply run to him and say, "Stay." But she didn't say it, She didn't run, she didn't scream, she just smiled a little, squeezing her arms around her body, as if she could stop the absence from starting to hurt even before the goodbye. Henrique looked at her with that same calm way as always, but his eyes didn't hide his fear. It wasn't fear of the new city, nor of the new job, it was fear of leaving and losing something that he hadn't even been able to name yet, but that he already felt was part of him. He held her hands for a few seconds, too long for time to pass as usual, and said, with a voice hoarse with anticipated longing, "If you ask me, I'll stay." Elisa froze, her eyes filled with tears, but not from beautiful emotion, from fear of being selfish, of holding him there and later regretting it, so she responded with a tenderness that hit a hurricane. "You have to go, Henry, this is your dream." He closed his eyes slowly, as if listening to a truth he already knew but didn't want to hear. He hugged her tightly, and for a moment, the two of them seemed to no longer exist anywhere, only in that hug, in that farewell that wasn't the end, but also wasn't certain of a new beginning. And he went, with the promise to return, with messages every day, with plans for the weekends, with the idea that love would endure everything, but time has a cruel way of testing those who love from a distance. The first few days were filled with sweet words, videos at night, "I miss you," and "I'll see you soon." But as the weeks went by, schedules got out of sync, calls got shorter, and messages took longer to arrive, and Elisa, who had always been good at waiting, started to feel like she was waiting alone. She clung to the memories, to the laughter that echoed through the hallways of the apartment, to the way he looked at her while she painted in silence, to the taste of the coffee they shared on Sunday mornings, and pretended that was enough, until the day her period didn't come. She didn't cry right away, she didn't panic, she just stayed silent for hours looking at the ceiling of the room, as if she was waiting for some answer to fall from the sky, and when she confirmed what she already knew, she felt the ground slip away from under her feet, not because she didn't want that baby, but because she didn't know how to deal with all of that alone. She tried to call Henrique, but he was in a meeting. Then she sent a message, but he replied hours later, asking if everything was okay, and she typed, "I need to tell you something," 3 times, and deleted it 3 times. In the end, she replied with just, "Everything is fine, I just miss you." That night, she slept hugging his pillow, her hands on her belly, and thought of all the ways to say, "I'm pregnant," but none of them seemed simple, none of them seemed enough, none of them seemed safe. The days turned into weeks, and every time she considered telling him, something inside her told her that he was already too far away, that maybe he had already moved on, that maybe finding out about the pregnancy would be more of a burden than a joy. And so, on any given Sunday, she sat on the living room floor with an old notebook and began to write. She wrote as if she were speaking directly to him, line by line, tear by tear. She told him from the day she felt that something was different, the fear of confirming it, the confusing joy of seeing the positive result, the immense love she already felt for that life growing inside her, the despair of imagining raising it alone, the guilt of not having told him before, the pride of not wanting to seem dependent, and finally, the truth that hurt the most. She still loved him, even knowing that she might never see him again. Henrique, if you ever read this, know that it was never a lack of love, it was fear. I wanted to protect you from pain, I wanted to protect you from me. But today, with my hands on my belly and my eyes full of tears, I just wanted you to know, you are going to be a father. She finished writing with her hands wet from crying, folded the paper with all the care in the world, put perfume on herself, as if the smell could pass through the paper, and for a long time, she looked at the letter as if looking at a part of her own heart outside her body. But the fear returned, like a ghost that never goes away, and with it came doubt, and with doubt, the most painful decision. She took the letter, looked at each line as if it were a farewell, and with her eyes closed, tore it into 7 pieces. 7 pieces. 7 months of silence. 7 times she almost told him and gave up. 7 attempts at courage that never came to fruition. She kept the pieces at the bottom of her desk drawer, along with old clippings, forgotten photographs, and a small box where she still kept the first note Henrique had written to her. And then, without anyone knowing, Elisa went on with her life. Pregnant, tired, torn between the love she felt and the fear of breaking everything she had rebuilt inside herself. But love never dies. It is silent. It waits. It transforms into silence, into care, into disguised longing. And even without knowing, even in pieces, I was still alive. The letter. The truth that would one day return to the surface, through the hands of someone who didn't even know yet that it would change everything. The letter remained there, or rather, what was left of it, like a poorly healed scar inside Elisa's drawer, among worthless papers and memories that she preferred not to touch, 7 pieces of a truth that she tried to bury over time, but that insisted on living, as if words written with the heart could not simply disappear. In the first few days after tearing up the letter, she walked around the house in silence, as if something had died inside her. Even though she was carrying a new life in her womb, it was as if there was an absence within the presence, as if there was an echo in every room, and whenever she passed the desk where she had hidden the pieces, her body would stop for a second, as if something inside her was asking her to go back. But she didn't go back. She told herself that it was better this way, that Henrique had the right to live in peace, that she could handle it, that she didn't need him to be a mother, but none of these phrases had any effect when night fell, when the pains of pregnancy came, when fears hit, when she put her hand on her belly and cried softly without understanding if it was longing or regret. She talked to her still unnamed daughter as if she were talking to an old friend. "You knew my love. Mom almost told you, but she couldn't. It's not for lack of love. It's for fear. Fear that he'll think you were a mistake. But you're not. You never will be." These conversations, said in a low voice, between sobs and trembling hands, were the only way Elisa had of relieving the weight she carried, the weight of knowing that she had silenced a truth that was not just hers. The pregnancy progressed, the days became heavier, her body more tired, but she did everything alone, went to appointments, listened to the baby's heartbeat, dried her tears before leaving the clinic, made excuses for her friends, and at the same time, kept each ultrasound in a cardboard box where she also placed the first little shoe and the first words she scribbled trying to choose a name. Henrique, on the other side, was still absent. Sometimes he would send a message, a memory, an old photo, but she no longer responded with the same joy. She would say she was busy, that she was fine, that life was busy, and he, perhaps realizing the distance, also began to slow down. They never officially broke up, but the silence between them became so thick that it was impossible to cross. And even so, Elisa dreamed about him almost every week, in confusing dreams where he appeared holding a child in his arms and saying, "I should have stayed." The words of the letter came back to her mind like whispers in the dark, and sometimes she repeated them softly, as if that were enough to mend what had been torn. "You're going to be a father," but it wasn't enough, nothing was, and time, that cruel teller of silences, doesn't forgive decisions made out of fear. Elisa gave birth on a gray morning, alone, holding the hand of a nurse who didn't even know her name, and when they placed the girl in her arms, she didn't cry right away. She just stared, as if apologizing with her eyes. I should have told him, but he didn't, and registered the girl as Sofia, a name she had always loved since she was little, and only put her surname, even though he felt, deep down, that something was missing on that certificate. The years passed faster than she expected. Sofia grew up with Henrique's eyes and Elisa's silence, a sweet, curious child, full of life, who every now and then asked if she had a father, and received evasive answers in return. "You have all the love you need here, daughter." And it was true, but it was also a lie, because even though a mother's love fills, there are questions that only the truth can answer. Sofia was 7 years old when she opened her desk drawer for the first time, looking for a colored pencil, and found an empty, old envelope, yellowed with time, and next to it, a small box with photos and folded papers. She rummaged through it like any curious child, and pulled out the 7 pieces of paper, with small letters, smudged in some corners. He put it together like a puzzle, trying to understand those difficult words, and when he read the sentence, "You are going to be a father," he felt his heart beat faster, as if he had found a piece of himself that he didn't even know was missing. "Mommy, who wrote this?" Elisa froze, her soup spoon poised in midair, her gaze lost on the wall, and for a few seconds, she wished that it was all a dream, that Sofia hadn't read it, that she could go back in time. But she couldn't. She sat on the kitchen floor, pulled her daughter onto her lap, and for the first time in 7 years, she told her the truth. She told her about Henrique, about the coffee, the notes, the love, his departure, the letter written, torn, hidden. Sofia didn't cry, she just listened in silence, as if she were absorbing everything at once. Doesn't he know I exist? No, my love, he never knew. But I want him to know, said little Sofia. Elisa felt a strange pain in her chest, between guilt and pride, between fear and hope, and at that moment, she realized that it was no longer just about her, that perhaps, for the love of her daughter, it was time to let the past speak. Sofia put the pieces of the letter in a new envelope, taping them together wherever she could, taking great care in the world, as if patching words together was also trying to patch up life. And before going to sleep that night, she put the envelope under her pillow. Tomorrow we'll give it to him, okay? And Elisa, for the first time in years, didn't answer with a no. She just cried in silence, stroking her daughter's hair, while whispering okay. Time passed as if apologizing for not stopping, rushing through the days without giving Elisa a chance to breathe properly. She carried on as best she could, with silent steps, discreet smiles, and a courage that no one saw, but that was always there, present in every choice, in every sacrifice. Raising Sofia alone was not what she had imagined, but she made it her most beautiful mission. The girl grew up with the joy of someone who didn't know what was missing, and Elisa did everything she could to make sure she didn't know, filling the gaps with long hugs, cuddles after school, pancakes for breakfast, and whispered promises while tucking her in at night. And although there was peace in that house of two, there was also a silence that spread like dust in the corners. A silence that not even the music on the radio could disguise. Henrique never knew. And as time went by, Elisa tried to believe that this was the right thing to do. That she had done the best thing. That protecting her daughter from the risk of rejection was more important than giving her all the answers. But deep down, she knew she wasn't being brave. She was just running away. Silence was easier than facing what could have been, easier than looking that man from the past in the eyes and admitting that love, no matter how beautiful it was, hadn't been enough to hold them both together. Sofia, since she was little, felt that there was something that was not being told. She didn't ask questions often, but she observed everything carefully. She noticed how tense her mother would get when she saw couples on the street, how she avoided talking about the past, how she would always keep quiet when the subject of her father came up in conversations at school. And even though she didn't understand, she felt it. She felt that empty space in her chest, as if a piece of her own story was missing. Sometimes, she would draw a tall man next to a woman with sad eyes and a girl with messy hair. Elisa would see these drawings and praise them with a trembling smile, but she never asked who the man was. She didn't need to. The years passed with Sofia growing up and harboring questions she didn't know how to ask. Until the day when, rummaging through a random drawer in her mother's desk, she found a blue shoebox. Inside it, pieces of paper stuck together with tape, in old, firm, feminine handwriting. She put it together like a puzzle. She read it slowly, and when she finished, she held in her hands the truth that would change everything. "You're going to be a father." The sentence echoed in her head like thunder in the middle of a silent afternoon. That night, she waited for Elisa to come home from work. She was sitting at her desk, her eyes fixed on the letter. When her mother came in, tired, Sofia didn't say anything right away. She just looked up and spoke with a calmness that was frightening. "I want to meet him, Mom." Elisa stopped. The world spun upside down for a few seconds. She wanted to deny it, to say that it wasn't time, that it was all in her daughter's head. But she didn't have the strength. They sat together on the living room floor. And for the first time, Elisa told her everything. She told her about love, about the cafe where they met, about the notes, the drawings, the postponed plans, the farewell, the discovery of her pregnancy, the letter, the fear, the decision not to send it. She talked non-stop, as if each word was releasing something that had been trapped for years. Sofia listened to everything in silence. When her mother finished, she didn't cry. She just said firmly, "He needs to know." And that's how they started looking. They searched the internet, social media, and architecture websites. They found an old photo, then a more recent one. They discovered a studio address in a nearby town. It was too close to seem like a coincidence. Sofia wrote a new envelope, folded the letter carefully, and tied a red bow. "I want to deliver it by hand," she said. On the day of the meeting, the sky was gray, as if the weather knew the importance of that moment. Elisa drove with sweaty hands, her heart racing. Sofia was calm, looking out the window, hugging the letter as if it were something sacred. When they arrived, Elisa couldn't get out of the car. "You go," she said softly. Sofia crossed the street with firm steps. She entered the studio. Henrique had his back to her, talking on the phone. She waited. When he turned around, they looked at each other. He frowned, confused. "Can I give you this?" she said, holding out the envelope. He took it, curious. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sofia." And then, for a second, he stopped. The name stuck in his throat like an old memory. Sofia turned and left. She only said one last thing before closing the door. "I think you need to read it." Henrique stood there, still, with the envelope in his hands. He sat down. He opened it. He read it. He stopped. He read it again. And when he understood, his world turned upside down. The daughter he never knew he had. The love he thought he had lost. The life that could have been. And in the middle of it all, one thing was certain. He needed to see them. He needed to see Elisa. He needed to see Sofia. Sofia got back into the car with cold hands and a racing heart, but on the outside, she seemed calm. She sat next to her mother and closed the door slowly, as if she didn't want to wake up the silence that now filled the space between them. Elisa didn't ask anything. She just held her daughter's hand tightly, and they stayed there for a few seconds, staring at the dashboard as if waiting for an answer that only time could bring. When they got home, Sofia went straight to her room, took the red ribbon out of her hair and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what he was feeling at that moment. What if he threw the letter away? What if he didn't believe her? What if he didn't want to know? But deep down, something told her that this wasn't the end of the story. The next morning, the phone rang. Elisa didn't recognize the number, she hesitated before answering, and when she did, the voice on the other end made time stand still. It was Henrique. He didn't ask anything right away. He didn't demand anything, he didn't accuse her. He just said her name with a mixture of relief and pain that Elisa had never heard before. "Elisa, I don't even know where to begin." She was silent, feeling her eyes fill with tears, and on the other end, he continued. "I read it. I read every word. And no matter how much time has passed, I want to see you. Today, please." Elisa hung up with trembling hands. She looked at Sofia, who was listening from the hallway door, and tried to smile, but all she could do was cry. "He wants to see us," she said, almost in a whisper. Sofia ran to her and hugged her as if she knew that a new chapter in their story was beginning. They got ready in silence, without saying much, just exchanging glances, and when they left the house, the world seemed different. The same sky, the same street, but everything had a different weight, a different color, as if life was reorganizing itself. Henrique was waiting for them on a park bench, sitting with his hands clasped between his knees, his face downcast, his eyes searching around anxiously. When he saw Elisa and Sofia approaching, he stood up slowly, as if he were afraid of moving too quickly and waking up from a dream. His eyes first stopped on Elisa, and for a few seconds, it was as if no time had passed. She was there, more of a woman, more mature, more silent, but still with that same look that once said "I love you" without needing words. Henry took a step forward, then another, but it was Sofia who closed the distance. She walked towards him calmly, and when she stopped in front of him, she looked at him with a sweet firmness, as if she wanted him to know that she held no grudges, only questions. He knelt down at her height and stood there, looking at that face that was half his and half Elisa's. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice breaking. Sofia responded with the most sincere innocence in the world. "You don't need to say anything yet. Just stay." Staying was all he wanted. He hugged his daughter carefully, as if she were made of glass, and Elisa, a few steps behind, cried, unable to get closer. When Henrique stood up and looked her in the eyes, there was no anger, no demands, just longing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elisa took a deep breath. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't come back. Afraid of looking weak. Afraid of ruining your life. And maybe I got used to hiding the pain." Henrique held her hands and said softly, "You wouldn't ruin anything. You were my life. And now, it's everything." The three of them sat on the bench, and time seemed to fold in on itself. Henrique asked questions with the care of someone who didn't want to intrude, and Sofia answered with the enthusiasm of someone who could finally tell her story. She talked about the first day of school, the nights she drew his face without really knowing what it looked like, the times she felt empty and thought it was missing something she had never known. Elisa watched the two of them with her heart in pieces and yet whole at the same time. She felt guilty, yes, but she also felt relief. She felt fear of what was to come, but for the first time in years, she also felt hope. Henrique didn't promise anything that day. He didn't say that everything would go back to the way it was before. But he did say one thing that stuck with her. I want to be in your lives. Really. Every day. If it's still possible. And Elisa, between tears and smiles, answered what her heart had been keeping for years. We still have time. The sun began to set in the sky, and the three of them stayed there for hours, talking about the past, making simple plans for the future, without rushing, without pressure. Sometimes they just looked at each other in silence, as if they still couldn't believe what they were experiencing. And at the end of that afternoon, when they said goodbye with a tight hug, Sofia held both of their hands and said, "We feel like family." And no one answered, because at that moment she was right. Henrique spent the night awake. The letter slept on the pillow next to him, as if it were the most vivid memory he had ever had. He reread it so many times that the words were already engraved in his memory. Each line written by Elisa seemed like a silent cry from the past, a belated confession, a love that did not die, but was forcibly kept. And in the middle of all this, there was Sofia, the daughter he had never met, but who was now impossible to get out of his mind. He remembered the way she spoke, her deep gaze, her calm gestures, so similar to Elisa's, as if time had planted a new chance there even after so much silence. The next morning he called Elisa. Her voice was cautious, as if she was still afraid of words. Henrique asked if he could see them again. He didn't want to pressure her, he just wanted to be close, to recover what was lost, even though he didn't know how to do it properly. Elisa hesitated for a few seconds too long before answering. This afternoon, in the park, near the fountain where we used to sit. Henrique smiled to himself when he heard that. It was as if the past had left a trail for him to follow. He arrived early, as he used to do when he wanted to impress Elisa with small gestures. He sat on the same wooden bench, under the tree that provided shade with leaves that danced slowly in the wind. The park was calm. Some children were playing in the distance, and the smell of flowers wet with dew gave the place an air of beginning, as if life were offering to start over. When he saw Elisa approaching with Sofia, his heart raced. They were walking side by side, and for a moment he wanted to freeze that moment. He wanted to save the image of them arriving, as if that were the most beautiful scene of his life. Elisa wore a light blue blouse and simple jeans, but to Henrique, she had never looked so beautiful. There was something in her eyes that was neither sadness nor joy, but a mixture of both. Sofia walked with light steps, holding her mother's hand, but when she saw Henrique, she ran and hugged him without thinking. It was a small hug, unhurried, but full of meaning. Henrique bent down and pressed her against his chest as if she could hear everything he still didn't know how to say. "You weren't angry?" she asked softly. Henrique smiled, his eyes brimming with tears. "I was sad, for not having been with you all these years. But angry? Never with you." Sofia nodded, and with the maturity that only a strong child carries, she answered. "I knew you would want to know." Elisa approached slowly, and the two looked at each other for a moment that seemed to last longer than time. There were things that words could not explain. There was pain there, of course. There was history. But there was also love. And Henrique, with a choked voice, said what he had kept inside for so long. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, Elisa. But if there is still any chance, even a small one, I want to try. I want to be in your lives. Not as a memory, but for real. Every day." Elisa took a deep breath. The wind ruffled her hair, and for a second, she looked exactly like she had years ago. "When you left, I promised myself that I would never depend on anyone. I promised myself that I would raise Sofia with the strength you left in me. And I kept that promise. But now she has the right to have you too. And maybe I also have the right to not carry everything alone. They sat together on the bench, and Sofia stood between them, laughing at stories she hadn't even experienced, asking questions as if she were reading a book about her own past. Henrique told her about the cities he had lived in, the music he liked, and between one memory and another, he always looked at Elisa with that look of someone who still held love between the lines. With each laugh from her daughter, with each word exchanged, it seemed like a piece of time was being mended inside her. When the sun began to set, the sky turned orange, as if the day wanted to leave one last light to illuminate that reunion. Sofia lay down on her mother's lap, closing her eyes for a moment, and Henrique stared at her as if he were watching a miracle. Elisa touched his shoulder and spoke softly. She waited for you without knowing. And you arrived at the right time. Henrique didn't answer. He just held Elisa's hand for a few seconds. And in that simple gesture, there was a silent promise. Of presence, of care, of not repeating the mistakes of the past, of building, from then on, a whole story with all the fragments that once seemed lost. The reunion was not an event with a set time or a rehearsed scenario. It happened little by little, like a flower bud that slowly opens after years of being dormant. Sofia was the bond that united those two worlds separated by time, and with the lightness of someone who carries more hope than sorrow in their chest, she was sewing together the spaces between absence and new beginning, one smile at a time, a curious question, an innocent joke that made the two adults laugh without realizing it. And that was how they were getting closer, without rushing, without promises, just with presence. Henrique started to show up more. Sometimes he would pick up Sofia from school, sometimes he would stay for dinner, other times he would just pass by the door with a flower in his hand, without words, just a shy gesture, but full of intention. And Elisa, who had built her entire life on the rock of independence, would find herself smiling to herself when she saw his name on her cell phone, fighting the urge to open her heart once and for all, but at the same time, wishing he wouldn't leave. Again. They didn't talk about the past often, perhaps for fear of ruining what they were building now, but every now and then, a memory would escape, like when Henrique said he still had one of the old letters that Elisa drew on the edges with little flowers, or when Elisa confessed that she still listened to the same song they danced to the first time they were silent together without feeling ashamed. Sofia, with her rare emotional intelligence, noticed everything, and it was she who, one night, held her mother's hand after dinner and said in a voice firmer than any adult Elisa had ever known, "You still love each other, don't you?" Elisa stopped, her fork in the air, her heart in her throat, and tried to laugh, but she couldn't. She just looked at her daughter and answered honestly, "We never stopped loving each other, daughter, we just forgot how to do it together." Sofia nodded, as if she understood more than she could explain, and went off to brush her teeth, leaving the two adults looking at each other, their eyes full of the past, but also of possibilities. Henrique approached the table, took Elisa's hand carefully, and for the first time after so many years, asked what he had never dared to ask. "Do you still want to try?" Elisa took a while to answer, but when she did, there was no more room for doubt. "I want to, but this time, slowly, truthfully, with everything in plain sight, without hidden cards, without silent goodbyes." And so it was. They started meeting on Sunday mornings, taking Sofia to the park, watching old movies curled up on the couch, cooking together as if they were learning to be a family without labels, without rushing, just feeling, rediscovering time, gestures, looks. Henrique made a point of asking everything about Sofia's childhood. He wanted to know how she said her first words, how her first day of school was, what she liked to draw, what stories Elisa told before bed, and each answer was like a page from a book that he should have read from the beginning, but that he now read with his heart in his hands. Elisa, in turn, allowed him to enter, even with fear still living in some corner of her chest. She let him see her scars, her days of tiredness, her mistakes, and also her silent victories, those that no one applauded, but that she lived with courage. There was one night in particular that left its mark on the three of them forever. It was a rainy Saturday. The power went out for a few hours and the three of them stayed in the living room lit only by candles. Henrique told stories from his childhood. Elisa remembered a trip she took with her mother, and Sofia, laughing, said that was the happiest day of her life. "Why?" Henrique asked, smiling. Because I always imagined what it would be like to have you two with me like this, and now I know." Elisa cried silently, hiding her face in his shoulder, and Enrique hugged her so tightly that it seemed like he wanted to glue together all the pieces of lost time. That night, when the power came back on, no one wanted to turn on the television. They just sat there in silence, listening to the rain outside, their hearts beating at the same rhythm. Enrique looked at Elisa and, in a low voice, said, "If this letter had found me before, maybe everything would have been different." She held his face in her hands and answered with eyes full of truth. "Maybe it wasn't the right time, maybe we needed to go through all of this to understand what really matters." And Sofia, even sleepy, added, "What matters is now." And there, in that now, there was no longer the weight of the past, nor the fear of the future. There were only three hearts that, after so many missed encounters, finally beat together. Time did not go back, nor did it retrace the paths, nor did it return the years that had passed between them, but on that calm Sunday night, while Sofia slept in the next room and the rain gently tapped on the window, Elisa and Enrique understood that not every story needs to start from the beginning to have a beautiful ending. Sometimes, love needs to miss the time, stumble over pain, lose itself before finding the right place to blossom. They were sitting on the floor of the living room, as they used to do in the beginning, with a glass of wine in their hands and their bare feet touching each other. They didn't say much, but everything had been said. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comfortable. It was full of presence. And, for the first time in many years, Elisa didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the choice alone. Enrique was there. Ready. With his eyes fixed on her like someone looking at a place they want to live. "I thought about you every day. Even in the years when we didn't speak. Even when I thought I had forgotten you. It was a lie, Elisa. I never forgot." Enrique said this in a low voice, as if he was confessing an old secret. Elisa closed her eyes for a second. She let the sentence sink in, like someone who lets the sun warm them after a long cold spell. Then she answered with the calm voice of someone who finally allows themselves to feel. "I never forgot either. And you know what else? I loved you with anger for a while. I loved you with longing. Then with silence. And now I love you calmly. With maturity. With truth. And with fear too. But it's a good fear. The one we feel when something really matters." Enrique approached slowly. He touched her face with both hands and rested his forehead against hers, as they had done in the beginning, when words were unnecessary. They stayed like that for a while, breathing together, recognizing each other after so many missed encounters. The next day, Enrique prepared breakfast. Elisa laughed at how he still did everything clumsily, as if he had never learned how to use a frying pan. Sofia, sitting at the table, watched everything with a smile that could not fit on her face. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. That was the house where she wanted to grow up. The house where truth lived, where love finally had a voice, where silences were replaced by presence. During the week, Enrique began to reorganize himself. He wanted to be closer, to share the days, not just Sundays. They talked about changes, about limits, about the traumas that needed to be respected. Nothing was decided in a hurry. But each step was an agreement between the three of them. There were no more secrets. There were no more hidden cards. One afternoon, while Elisa was tidying the bookshelf in Sofia's room, she found the blue box. The one where the glued letter was kept. She sat on the bed, opened it carefully, and once again, read everything. But this time, she read it with a smile. Because those words were no longer a farewell. They were part of the journey. Part of what built what they were living now. Enrique arrived shortly after. He saw Elisa with the letter in her hands and approached her without saying anything. He sat down next to her and waited. This letter was once fear. It was once pain. It was once shame. But today it is only love. Because even with everything we lost, it was this letter that brought us here. Even torn. Even forgotten. Even stuck with tape. Henry took a deep breath. He took the letter from her hands and put it back in the box. Then he hugged her from behind and said softly, "This letter is now a memory. And our story begins here, in what we choose to do with what is left." The following weekend, The three of them went to the park together. The same one where Henrique met Sofia for the first time. They took a towel, cut fruit, a storybook, and a disposable camera. They wanted to capture that moment in the simplest way possible. No filter, no posing, just who they were there. Elisa took a picture of the two of them together, then Henrique took one of them, and at the end, Sofia asked a girl to take one of the three of them together. And when she looked at the camera, before the click, she said, smiling, "Now yes, we are whole." At night, when they returned home, while Elisa put Sofia to bed, Henrique looked at the undeveloped photos and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not an empty piece, but the kind that comes after a long storm, when everything around is wet, but the sky begins to open up. That morning, while the world slept, Elisa woke up, turned to him and said in a nearly muffled voice, "Do you think we deserve this second chance?" Henrique pulled her closer and answered without hesitation, "We not only deserve it, we built it." And then they embraced in the dark, with a calm heart, a light soul, and the love of someone who, even though they arrived late, arrived at the right time. Sometimes, love needs to make mistakes in time to understand its value. And when the truth finally finds courage, it doesn't destroy, it heals. This story is about silences that become bridges, about secrets that one day turn into reunions, and about the power of starting over even when we think it's too late. If you kept a letter inside you, if you have words you never said, or if you are still waiting for someone to come back, may this story remind you that time can erase many things, but it never erases what was written with true love. If this story touched your heart, like the video, share it with someone special and subscribe to the Say You Pudes Failure channel. Comment here. If an object in your life could talk, what would it say? Because sometimes, all it takes is the courage to open that forgotten drawer and let love out.